Like the
Kamala
extremist
Harris
store.
and former President
not you good people
Donald Trump are essentially tied.
Tied.
According to the latest poll from CBS News and YouGov, in the survey, Harris's support of 50% of likely voters nationwide compared to 49% for Trump. That's within the margin of error. Among likely black voters, the poll shows Harris leading Trump by 63 points, 81% to 18%. That's lower than 87% of black voters who voted for the Biden-Harris ticket in 2020, but an 8-point increase from Biden's numbers in the last poll conducted before he ended his campaign.
They would say most definitely going in the right direction.
Among young voters, Harris's lead over Trump is similar to the one Biden held in his last poll. According to the survey, Harris leads Trump by 26 points among 18 to 29-year-olds after Biden led by 22 points last month. In 2020, exit polls show Biden beat Trump by 24 points among that same group. CBS News is also out with its first battleground states estimates of the 2024 election cycle, which are gathered based on past polling, census data, and historical trends. According to the tracker, Trump and Harris are deadlocked in Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Trump holds leads within the margin of error in Georgia, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, while Harris leads within the margin of error in Nevada.
So, not really surprising here, John Heilemann. I mean, obviously surprising if you look at all the polls, how most of them, the most recent polls have we've had a bit of a reversal where you heard Karl Rove coming in talking about the momentum seems to be on her side, and it does seem to be on her side right now. It seems to be on the Democrat side. She's pulled ahead by 1 or 2 points in most polls, which means it's tied. You look at the swing states, it means it's tied. What I find fascinating and completely predictable is the fact that Joe Biden was having biggest problems, and we've said it on this show forever, that Joe Biden would have to bring home younger voters. He would have to bring home people of color. That's what Kamala Harris appears to be doing here. She is bringing home people of color. She's bringing home younger voters to the Democratic Party. And the big question on who's going to be the next president of the United States is whether she can perform almost as well as Joe Biden did among older working class white voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So that's a $64,000 question, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's among the. I would broaden that $64,000 question now, Joe, to ask the question of whether she can perform as well as Joe Biden did in 2020 with young voters, African-American voters, and Latino voters, because although she has, there's undeniably, the momentum is with her right now. She is performing better than Biden was prior to his decision to bow out, and actually better than he was throughout the last couple of years with all those groups. Her number, though, his number was way down from where his numbers were with those groups in 2020. She has made up, she's overperforming him in 2023, 2024, but she's still not up to the levels that he was at in 2020 with any of those groups. That's one of the things that she has to do. There's reasons to think if this momentum continues with all those voter segments that she can do that, and the numbers are all going in the right direction, but she's still not there. You know, if you look at, even when this, I'm trying to look at what the number here is on with African Americans as an example. She has right now is at 81 with 81 to 18 over Trump. Biden hasn't had 90% of the black vote in 2020. So I just say that there's no one on the Harris campaign doesn't realize that those are categories where they need to ride the momentum, the rise that she's had, and try to get her back to Joe Biden level of 2020 if she's going to be able to win the election in November.
So, Gene Robinson, the poll also has this tidbit about black voters. Back on July 18th, those surveyed, 58% said they were definitely going to vote. That number jumps to 74% now. So that is significant. We know that the Trump campaign has said they've tried to make inroads with those communities. Obviously, we've seen his numbers dwindle. It's a priority of the Harris campaign. So speak to us about the state of the race. That's part of it now, but it seems like the map's expanding because by the final days of the Biden campaign, he seemed to only have one path to victory, the Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan route, while for Harris, She's got options.
Yeah, no, she's got options. This just in, she is going to match Biden's numbers among African American voters. I am sure of that. And so, yeah, she expands the map because now all of a sudden, what about Georgia? What about North Carolina? There are, and what kinds of vote margins can she get out of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, out of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, out of Detroit in Michigan? I think these are significant gains that she has made. Even if you just look at African American voters, and she's been a candidate for all of 2 weeks, right? So let it sink in at least for another couple of weeks, and we'll see where we are. It's very clear what direction she's headed.
You know, Donald Trump's always been obsessed with crowd sizes. Obviously, his first day as president of the United States was embarrassing for everybody involved in the White House because he was so obsessed with the sparse crowd.
He forced people
that
to
came
lie
out.
about it.
Right, but you saw that still play out again in Georgia, and it played out with Kamala Harris's rally in Atlanta, which was pretty massive, and Donald Trump upset by the fact, I think, that it was larger, that hers was larger than his, also that people started to leave. AP reporting that a steady stream of people left during his 91-minute speech. But again, this is the sort of thing, crowd sizes don't win elections, but it's something obviously that's gotten in Donald Trump's head.
Yeah, it shows excitement. Donald Trump was in Atlanta Saturday. That's, as Joe mentioned, the same building where Vice President Kamala Harris held a rally just 4 days earlier. Before Trump even arrived at the Georgia State University Convocation Center, he was tempering expectations for the size of his crowd, writing on social media that Harris only filled the building because she had entertainers perform at her rally. But the Associated Press notes that was not the case. In the 25 minutes Harris spoke, in fact, Trump lost sizable chunks of supporters across his 91-minute speech. Yet Trump frequently returned to the topic of crowd size, even suggesting that school administrators conspired with the Harris campaign to keep his supporters outside the arena.
Crazy Kamala, ultra left, you know that. She was here a week ago, lots of empty seats. But the crowd she got was because she had entertainers. The school administration stopped us from getting another 500, 600, even 1,000 people in. Thousands of people were told, no, I'm not happy about it. If they're going to stand in the way of admitting people to our rally, just imagine what they're going to do on Election Day. They got thousands of people, they won't let them in. A Harris presidency, you know why? Because they don't want to show that we're successful, that's all it is. They don't want to show. She has to go get entertainers. They start leaving as soon as she opens her mouth. By the way, the entertainer couldn't fill the place either. Even with the help of the school's trying to get students, please go. This is embarrassing to us. Please go.
This is one of these things where you ask, are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? The fact is the Harris rally was packed. There was a lot of excitement there, more excitement than we've seen at a Democratic rally in a very long time. It certainly reminded a lot of reporters there of Barack Obama in 2008. Just again, excitement that a lot of people have been saying has sort of been bottled up for quite some time for Democrats, and they're out there now. But Elise, we've always said, we've always believed, I've always told people running for office that campaigns are about the future. They're not about the past. I could add to that, they're not about crowd sizes. They're not about grudges. They're not about resentments. They're not about all the things that fueled Donald Trump's campaign. And people say, well, he won. Yeah, he won in 2016. And I'm not going to go through the litany of years that Trump Republicans have lost from 2017 all the way through 2023. And it's because it's always resentment. It's always crowd sizes. It's always who he's going to, who's treasonous. It's always praising Vladimir Putin. It's all these really weird things. What if I said weirdos, insurrectionists, and freaks, the extremists that are far out there pushing a lot of the crazy stuff. And it's just, again, that's not where middle America is.
if Donald Trump stays out there and keeps bringing negative attention on himself, not any of his legal problems, just by what he did at the Atlanta rally, talking badly about popular GOP governor, that was a great move in a state you need to win. And you can just see Donald Trump is responding to all of the enthusiasm surrounding Kamala Harris's campaign. And you've got the enthusiasm comes first, then comes the uptick in the polling, which we're starting to see, and then it's going to be the ballot. And Donald Trump is responding to a chain of events that is probably starting to feel a little bit out of control as he is just groping around, getting nastier and angrier and losing all sense of discipline. Every modicum that he had summoned for a week-long period, that's just clearly gone, evaporated, and he's back to old Donald Trump.
The DNC is concluding its delegate voting late today, with Kamala Harris on track to become the party's official nominee. This is the official developments that come after she had passed the number of delegate votes she needed Friday. And it comes as the New York Times is reporting Donald Trump is now shook. Harris is surging in a language that Donald Trump speaks. Big rallies, big ratings, and these gripping, made-for-TV images. The New York Times has this new article out that reflects what's going on in Trump world and will probably be noticed in Trump world. What's rattling Trump? The headline reads, the size of Harris's crowds. Her star turn on the stage across all of national politics and the way she's being received has, quote, unsettled Mr. Trump. And in Washington, there are Republican senators who are speaking anonymously for obvious political reasons, but still who want to share what they see as the concern that Trump has been completely caught, quote, off guard by Kamala Harris's strength. Quote, I think she's more formidable than Republicans give her credit for, says one of these Republican senators. Quote, it's going to be a short election that favors her. It's going to be a sprint that helps her. And this enthusiasm that we're seeing that's been covered here on MSNBC and in local papers and all across the internet, the kind of extravagant, sometimes excitable crowds, is gone beyond just Democrats. It's visible across these events.
If you've got something to say, say it to my face. I know Donald Trump's type.
That's the energy. There are echoes of the early enthusiasm about Barack Obama, and this is what Kamala Harris was doing during those early days, which is back in the news, as we've mentioned, because she and her aides want to rebuild that winning Obama coalition, and it's something that her aides know a lot about. Now, here she was in Iowa in 2007. Here she was a couple of years later at Obama's 50th.
We are here to celebrate our great president's birthday and celebrate and thank God for the day he was born. We are here because we understand that re-electing this great president is about us, it is about our children, it is about our grandparents, it is about our grandchildren, it is about our community, it is about our present, and it is about our future.
That was then. Harris was a supporter who'd gone from the ground field operations of Iowa, as I've told you about how that's relevant, all the way up to becoming a senator eventually. But this was long before vice president, long before she was seriously rumored for the barrier-breaking path she's on today. Harris is now in the position to hire just about whoever she can in the Democratic Party, and that's why it's big news that broke Friday going into the weekend that she's also tapped Obama's victorious campaign manager, David Plouffe. He joins her campaign in a kind of unique role because as the former campaign manager, he can nominally report to anyone, but ultimately is at the top talking to Harris, and his assignment is the campaign's goal, the path to 270, the number of electoral votes you need. She is also reviewing running mate options, speaking to several people over the weekend. As you've heard, we are bracing for that announcement tomorrow with all of the special coverage that you'd expect. Of course, if it leaks out earlier, we'll bring that to you as well, but that is expected to be the big news tomorrow. Now, Harris' campaign is building on momentum as well with virtual rallies and Zooms that have been tapping these different groups and also raising money online. I'm sure you've heard about some of them. These are just a few that we've put on the screen. You can see how big they get. Most of the faces, the majority of thousands of faces, not seen on any single screen. Those are selections. Now the longtime liberal activist and self-identified senior, Jane Fonda, is teaming up with Bernie Sanders and Bette Midler for a special call. It is called Elders for Harris. It's another nod to how the campaign's youth excitement doesn't come at the expense of any other group. Ben Stiller, D.L. Hughley, Jason Bateman are also doing a Comics for Kamala huddle. Now, does this buzz go beyond the activists and donors? Well, new numbers show a 14-point jump. That's 14 points in the jump of black voters who are telling pollsters now they plan to vote as opposed to before when Biden was at the top of the Democratic ticket. Now, that doesn't mean they're all voting only for Kamala Harris, and it doesn't mean she's going to win in November. I've told you we're very careful with what we interpret polls to mean, but it does show a kind of bump in enthusiasm and excitement about the election after Harris announced. Meanwhile, some red-leaning states are back in potential play, according to Axios, citing Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina as places that at least Trump will have to spend money on defense, which is a shift. Harris is prepping the running mate announcement, while the blowback to J.D. Vance on the Republican side has become something that he has to openly address out loud in interviews.
Some people are saying you were the wrong pick for Trump's running mate. What are you doing about it?
I recognize that there are a lot of folks, even in the GOP establishment and certainly on the far left, who don't like the fact that Donald Trump picked me.
According to the polls, J.D. Vance is the least liked VP nominee in decades.
I actually take their criticism as a badge of honor.
Well, if criticism is a badge, Vance must be cooking up a special reaction for this new little moment from Nancy Pelosi, who seemed downright giddy about J.D. Vance's baggage for the Republican ticket. This is from her new CBS interview.
Did Donald Trump make a mistake when he chose J.D. Vance?
Oh, I think it was a great choice.
A great choice spoken by the opponent, meaning great for the Democrats, bad for the Republicans. Now, that might be a natural reaction. J.D. Vance has not had the best rollout. It may also be something we see a lot in campaigns and politics, which is projecting strength. But remember, the efforts to project strength, enthusiasm, or other things the Democrats wanted a month or two ago were not working. Now, you don't have to ask Republicans or random independent voters. You could ask the Democratic Party itself, which did something so unusual and extraordinary that everyone is still just taking in the reaction. But it did something that, as you've heard, had never been done this late in a cycle. It basically told the sitting president, thank you, you're great, we love you, quote unquote, is something Speaker Pelosi also said in that interview last night regarding Biden, but we need to make a change as a political party. We are just weeks into the change. So far, it is working by every measurable way that you look at campaigns. The ad spending I mentioned in those normally red states, the crowd sizes that have Trump rattled, the record fundraising numbers that not only smash what the Democrats were doing, but smash all Republican and Trump records. So in all these ways, it's working. But that doesn't mean it's worked yet. There are 90-plus days to go, and there are people around Kamala Harris who are saying the enthusiasm is so good and it's a good problem to have. They want to remind everyone they are still running against the former president who's been up in the polls for a long time. They are still running basically from behind, and on the calendar, on the schedule of who's had time to plan and build field organizations and build networks, well, they're running behind by many, many months.
Trump is now endorsing not one, but two different Republicans in a Washington state congressional race. Why? Because he wants to defeat another Republican, Congressman Dan Newhouse, because Newhouse voted to impeach him for inciting the January 6th Capitol riot. Now, just a reminder, Donald Trump is running to be president again. He is in a tight race with Kamala Harris, as we've been talking about. You would think he might be focused on that, right? But instead, he is spending a lot of time and energy attacking fellow Republicans. Like this weekend when he called for a purge of the Republican Party and attacked the former lieutenant governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, who has endorsed Harris. And just a few hours later, at a rally in Georgia, Trump repeatedly attacked the state's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and the Republican governor, who's very popular, Brian Kemp, who both refused to go along with Trump's lie that he won the election in Georgia in 2020.
Brian Kemp, your governor, who I got elected, by the way. He's a very disloyal person, isn't he? Very disloyal. Kemp and Raffensperger are doing everything possible to make 2024 difficult for Republicans to win. You can do a lot better, and you'll do a lot better with a better governor. This state has become a laughingstock over it. He's a bad guy, he's a disloyal guy, and he's a very average governor. Little Brian Kemp. Bad guy.
I mean, what's pretty clear from all of this is that Trump won't stop until he rids the Republican Party of everyone who isn't sufficiently obedient, which is why some Republicans aren't just speaking out against him. They're actually endorsing Kamala Harris. In fact, the campaign just announced a new group called Republicans for Harris, which launched over the weekend with over 24 Republican endorsements, including former governors, members of Congress, and Trump administration officials. One of those Republicans is Joe Walsh, a former congressman from Illinois, and he joins me now. Thank you so much for joining me. I mean, so looking at this list, it's a very impressive list, a diverse list. A lot of those people on the list have been pretty public opponents of Trump. So tell me a little bit more about what the group is going to be doing and what specifically they'll do to try to defeat him.
Hey, Jen, great to be with you. Look, what we want to do is give Republicans around this country, especially in the battleground states, the courage to come out and say we're better than Donald Trump. We know there are a lot of Republicans in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania who don't want to support Trump. They're afraid because, Jen, as you know, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure locally. And when you publicly oppose Trump as a Republican, you pretty much end your career as a Republican. That's a scary thing. You talked about how the party has become a cult. He's already purged people who are not obedient to him. What we're going to do this campaign is we're going to get out there and tell Republicans all throughout this country that we're better. You're better than Trump. And doggone it, support Kamala Harris, the only person who can keep this guy out of the White House.
That all sounds good, I think, to everybody watching. I want to ask you, not that you can get into the mind of Donald Trump, but you're familiar with what it's like to be attacked by him. And I can't figure out a couple of his attacks. I mean, he's went after Brian Kemp over the weekend, who's a very popular Republican governor of Georgia. I mean, he wants to win, I assume, Donald Trump. What do you think is going on there?
Well, Jen, that's a tough question because in truth, we don't know what's going on there. In truth, much of what Trump says doesn't make sense. We try so hard to normalize this guy. He's a horrible human being. He lies as he breathes. He doesn't give a damn about anybody but himself. He's utterly un-American. He's a sociopath. He's a psychopath. He's incapable of bringing people together. So at one level, Jen, it makes no sense what he's saying. But at the other level, he wants to beat this party down. I believe this. Until the only people in my former party are people who are on their knees pledging to him every day. It's going to be a party that shrinks. And there's a great opportunity here to convince Republicans that Kamala Harris is American. Kamala Harris supports democracy and the rule of law. So come on, stand up now.
You may have just answered the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is just, you know, there are people, and some of the people who are on this Republicans for Harris committee have said, I don't agree with her on policy issues, but this is a moment where our democracy is at stake. You're having a lot of private conversations. Well, so what are you personally saying to fellow Republicans, current or former, who may find it difficult to vote for a Democrat for president?
Jen, I'm a weird guy in that I come from MAGA. I voted for Trump in 2016. I'm a reformed MAGA gangbanger. I still talk to these folks every single day. And what I tell them is this is like a really rare, unique moment in American history where you have the opportunity to quite literally save this experiment. You nailed it, Jen. It's not about policy. And I say that over and over. Kamala Harris and I probably disagree on most policy. This is not about policy. This is about preserving this thing that we all believe in. And Jen, the other thing I say to Republicans throughout the country is, you're better than Trump. Trump believes you're cruel. He believes you're intolerant. He believes you're angry all the time. That's not you. You're better than that. That seems to resonate with a lot of Republicans who are on the fence.
It's really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, former Congressman Joe Walsh, recovering former MAGA gangbanger, to quote you. I really appreciate you joining me this evening.
Some more new and yet somehow familiar attacks from Donald Trump against Kamala Harris today, this time blaming her for the stock market sell-off, calling it the Kamala crash and calling her stupid and a radical left lunatic. It's a page from the classic Trump playbook, blaming opponents and name-calling, but not what the campaign said back in mid-July, that they had been preparing to go against her for weeks if she replaced Biden. And now Trump is all but admitting that their strategy is still a work in progress.
4 months ago, she was considered grossly incompetent by the fake news. Now they're saying, oh, isn't she wonderful? Isn't she wonderful? No, she's not wonderful. So we have to work hard to define her. I don't want to even define her. I just want to say who she is. She's a horror show. She'll destroy our country.
Joining us now, Maya Rupert, former campaign manager for Julian Castro, former Warren for President senior advisor, and host of the podcast When We Win with Maya Rupert. And Brendan Buck, former press secretary to vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan, former press secretary to former House Speaker John Boehner, and MSNBC political analyst. Brendan, do these latest attacks speak to the fact that Trump may not have anything new in his playbook? He's just riffing. I mean, is there a plan that you see?
Well, there should be a plan. The thing about this is this shouldn't be that hard. There are plenty of what should be effective messages against Kamala Harris. And we've talked a great deal about how the campaign this time around is much more professionalized than the past Trump campaigns. But none of that matters if your candidate can't stick to the script, or if your candidate wants to go with their gut more than what the data shows. I mean, this should be pretty simple. Kamala Harris is too liberal for this country, wants to take us too far to the left. Here are all the reasons why. And instead, he thinks that he can convince people that she's not black enough or that she's stupid. I'm sure that that's not what his campaign wants to do, but he can't help himself. And he's blowing what is the most important part of the campaign here for him. This is the moment where people are going to define her. People know who Kamala Harris is, but they don't have very strong views about her. And this was the time when he needed to define her, and he's blowing it, and her favorability ratings are rising. And I don't think he can fix this at this point.
So, Maya, the Wall Street Journal reports that Trump's team actually did have a Harris strategy. Then he went off script about her race. It says that attack risks harming his larger campaign strategy to define her. But Congressman Byron Donalds is downplaying the criticism. Here's what he said.
This is really a phony controversy. I don't really care. Most people don't. But if we're going to be accurate, when Kamala Harris went into the United States Senate, it was AP that said she was the first Indian American United States senator. It was actually played up a lot when she came into the Senate. Now she's running nationally. Obviously, the campaign has shifted.
Is Trump at NABJ a phony controversy? Could this be another controversy that has no apparent impact on Trump? Or what do you make of what the campaign said they had in place, which was a strategy?
I think it's very clear they did not have a strategy. They don't have an effective one, and are showing that they really do not have a response to Kamala Harris. And I don't think that it is a phony controversy at all, that people are reacting very negatively to what the former president said, to his feigning confusion over the concept of a biracial identity, because it's an incredibly racist attack. And I don't think it's a small issue if someone who's running for president is being openly and blatantly racist. And I think it should be called out. It's being called out, and trying to downplay it as something that's being fabricated. While at the same time, I mean, when Donalds has talked about this, at the same time that he's calling it a voting controversy, he's repeating the ridiculous lie that she can only be one piece of her identity at any given time. That is not, this isn't a particularly complicated issue. She is biracial. She is both a Black woman and an Indian woman. The AP reported that she was the first Indian American senator, which was true, and there's no controversy here. So them using that language and repeating it over and over again is showing they're clearly doubling down on it. It's not a phony controversy, and people do have a right to hold them accountable for it.
So I also want to talk about another piece of the messaging, and that is the Trump campaign continuing to have to fend off with a appearance by apparently a cat. Cat ladies. Well, honestly, is that timed or is that timed? Because we were going to talk about the J.D. Vance childless cat ladies mark, which his wife Usha has now come to his defense. Let me play that.
The reality is he made a quip in service of making a point that he wanted to make that was substantive, and it had actual meaning. And I just wish sometimes that people would talk about those things and that we would spend a lot less time just sort of going through this three-word phrase or that three-word phrase, because what he was really saying is that it can be really hard to be a parent in this country. And sometimes our policies are designed in a way that make it even harder.
I'm not going to ask Crispin the cat for an opinion on that. I'm going to go over to you, Brendan. Look, I mean, his wife, accomplished woman, goes on TV to try to defend what he said. I don't know if it's really hard to be a parent is what most people heard, or what Donald Trump said, which is that, families are good things. Is this helping?
Well, let me say this. I have a level of sympathy for the candidates' spouses who get dragged into this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's hard to watch sometimes when you get attacked. The problem is that this was not just a one-off statement that he made. He's made this a bit of his routine. Look, I think that J.D. Vance is struggling to communicate because a lot of this is new to him, in that he seems to have adopted a worldview in recent years and gone all in on it and hasn't really figured out the right way to talk about these things. There's a very proud tradition of being pro-family in the Republican Party, but you don't do it by attacking individuals and attacking other people. And he just doesn't seem to get that. So I don't know if it's a put on or what it is. And it just shows you the lack of maturity that I think he's demonstrating. And she's doing a much better job of turning the tables or changing the subject that he's been able to. And frankly, they're going to keep poking at him and they're going to keep calling him names until he figures out a way to change the conversation.
Let me show you, Claire McCaskill, some of what we're talking about, this incredible sort of bench of talent. And again, these are just three of the folks reported to be under consideration.
These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away. They want to be in your exam room. That's what it comes down to. And don't, get sugarcoating this. These are weird ideas. These guys are just weird. And it's, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something. That's what they go at. That's not what people are interested in. I think that's what you see that's just so terrifying about these guys like Vance and Trump. Look, they've got their vision of what a family looks like, and I'll defend them to have that. Just don't tell me what my family looks like. I keep talking about the golden rule of small towns is mind your own damn business. Mind your own family. Stay out of our business. And it gets worse than that, though. The policies that they put in place that undermine families.
He said people who don't have children, this is a quote, have no physical commitment to the future of this country.
Wow.
And I just think about how, no physical commitment to the future of this country. Like, when I was deployed to Afghanistan, I didn't have kids back then.
Right.
But I will tell you, especially when there was a rocket attack going on, my commitment to this country felt pretty physical.
Governor, J.D. Vance just said this about you, and these are his words, quote, he compared you to a really bad impression of Barack Obama. What is your response to that?
Is that what he said? It's great. Barack Obama was probably our most gifted orator of my time, so it's kind of a weird insult, I guess. But look, I'll say this about J.D. Vance. It is real hard being honest with the American people when you're not being honest with yourself. J.D. Vance is a total phony baloney. He is the most inorganic candidate I think I have ever seen on the national stage. He doesn't know what he believes. And that is why it is impossible for him to articulate a coherent message to the American people, because he doesn't believe it.
So, Clara, what I'm going to say might not be popular or even in my interest, but it doesn't matter who she picked. Everyone on this list is in a next level league, from the person at the top and in the number 2 spot on the Republican side. I mean, the Harris candidacy is just brimming with enthusiasm and energy, and I think a vivaciousness that the Democrats didn't even expect and the Republicans certainly didn't. And everyone on this list is so solid and so talented that I wonder, I mean, sometimes I'm anxious and I'm checking my phone to see if the news is leaked yet. And sometimes I'm like, oh, they're all great. How are you waiting for this news?
Well, first, I've got to give a shout out to my friend Charlie Sykes. I spit coffee over the weekend when I saw how he referred to Trump, that Trump is in the fat Elvis stage of his career.
I feel like that's mean to Elvis.
I know, but I love that. I love that. And so I didn't want to go any further in this program without giving love to my fellow pundit Charlie Sykes for the fat Elvis. And by the way, fat Elvis is worried, and so is the weirdo he picked as his running mate. Because, you know, this field is pretty damn good. She really isn't going to get in trouble with any of these selections. Now, having said that, I think Yamisha's right. She's going to want somebody that she can feel a personal connection to, that she feels comfortable with. And we have no way of knowing who that is, because we're not in the room when they visit and talk and when she asks questions and he asks her questions. So, you know, I love Tim Walz because he's so plain spoken and relatable. I think Shapiro is boffo and does do something really important in Pennsylvania. Obviously, Pete Buttigieg is one of the most talented communicators of active in the political world right now. They're all very, very good. And I don't think we're getting in trouble. I think what's really funny is how people are trying to stir up that there's some big brouhaha in the Democratic Party that we're all fighting over who the vice president should be. In their dreams, we're not fighting over who the vice president should be. It's going to be fine no matter who she picks. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie, this was, I think, in the Bulwark today, that the internet is not the real world. Democrats are not actually at war with one another over this election. It relates to, and you know, in the same way that we don't ever lead this program with polls, we don't lead this program with horse race, and we're not going to game out what she gets with one or the other. But I do, in this sort of last news cycle before we know who she picks, I do want to stick with this idea of this massive bench as another accomplishment of President Joe Biden's. I mean, this is the Biden agenda being a magnet, not repellent. This is when you are for bridges and roads and not for injecting bleach. This is what happens to your party. And I wonder, I know the Republican Party is sort of post-inflection point, but I do wonder what happened to all the people who used to care about developing a bench on the other side.
I actually think this is one of the most interesting storylines of the last few years. The Republican Party has been purging its bench. They have been primarying some or exiling many of their best and the brightest. And then we, you know, look up in 2024 and we see which party has a deep bench in the governorship and in the Senate races. And I agree with Senator McCaskill about the fact that the party will come together. It is an impressive group. I have to admit that I am a huge Pete Buttigieg fan. I think that he is the most gifted politician that I can recall seeing in the last 20 or 30 years. Josh Shapiro seems like he is that he has been made for this particular electoral map. I mean, he has won 3 elections in the pivotal state of Pennsylvania since 2016. He was elected governor by 15 points, and he has a 61% approval rating in an absolute must-win state. I have no doubt that everybody's going to come together. I have to admit I'm a little bit troubled by some of the vicious attacks on Josh Shapiro, especially involving Israel. I do think that might leave some scars. I think it makes perhaps the decision a little bit more complicated, but he is a very, very impressive, would be an impressive partner, as would, I think, Mark Kelly in another swing state in Arizona.
You know, Eddie, when this whole sort of process was underway, and President Joe Biden made the decision to step off the ticket, my first thought was this is what a healthy body does, right? A healthy organism can take in information from other party leaders, Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, or the history books will tell the full story of where that all came from, perhaps his family, perhaps his own conscience. And I feel like the search for a number 2 on the ticket is another sign of a healthy body, a healthy political party that is not sort of slashing and burning one another, that looks pretty deliberate. The other thing I will say, and no one has pointed this out, but the fact that nothing has leaked is a sign of deep respect for the candidate herself and her process. What do you make of this? This is probably the last time we'll all be together before we know who the VP pick is.
Well, Nicole, I think you're absolutely right that it shows that the Democratic Party is healthy, it's vibrant, but there's still some serious fissures. And, like you, I'm sitting here anxious. I think the bench is deep. It's obvious the bench is deep, but I'm also worried. I'm worried about constituencies. I'm worried about the things that have been said about Shapiro and Gaza that Charlie's mentioned and the like. So I think, how can I put this? I think the principle here should be do no harm. Do no harm to the enthusiasm. Do no harm to the young folk who are ready and willing and invested. Do no harm to the base. And part of that involves, I think, and maybe I'm in different circles than Claire and Charlie, I think that involves not kind of billboarding the politics as usual in the pick, if that makes sense. But all this is to say, that's just my anxiety, Nicole. All this to say is that, everything is good. Everything is good, but I'm still anxious, I suppose.
Now, I look, I mean, this is part of a healthy body, right? If you're raising a kid, you have to start the language of anxiety, and right? Anxiety is healthy, and some stress is healthy, and you're constantly looking to see when it's too much and when it's, but I think the anxiety is healthy. It's about being in touch with your base, not manipulating them, brainwashing them, and telling them not to believe what they see and not what they hear. I think that's where it comes back, though, to what we're going to learn about Vice President Kamala Harris, because I think, Claire McCaskill, you can argue, to Eddie's point, you can argue it either way. She has an opportunity to showcase sort of her strong leader credentials, which are dripping off her. I mean, she's the first politician to say, what Trump would do, yes, it's scary, but basically she's running against a buffoon. And she's not mocking his supporters. She's mocking his cowardice. Why isn't he debating? Because he's afraid to say it to my face. That was her line, I think, on Monday or Tuesday. Why is he going after her identity? She hasn't given 5 speeches about the history of biracial Americans, which is glorious and which would speak to a whole bunch of people. She has really displayed her strength as a leader and a politician. And I think to Eddie's point, there are decisions that might reflect, I know this is out there, but this is who I felt most comfortable with. And there are decisions that would do a different very good thing, which is to say, we've only got 92 days, and if you're explaining, you're losing. How do you think she balances those two?
I honestly don't think she's going to have to do a whole lot of balancing. I just feel like whoever is selected is going to shine immediately. I think these are all really, really effective communicators, and they are used to communicating to people who don't necessarily belong to their party. Tim Walz is probably in the bluest state of any of the candidates that are being seriously considered. But these folks are from places where you've got to find people to agree with you that don't necessarily call them a Democrat. And that's what she needs right now. Remember, what's happening right now is the party is consolidating our base. She is getting back to comfortable numbers with traditional Democratic voters because they see her as exciting and competent and a leader and is such a wonderful contrast to Fat Elvis. They just can't help themselves. But she still needs another 2% in these battleground states. And that 2% are formerly double haters. They're people who have voted for both Democrats and Republicans. And what she's got to make sure she does with this selection is communicate to them that I'm not an extremist. And if she does that, I think any of these candidates will convey that. I think she's going to be in a really good position in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and even in places like Georgia Arizona, Nevada, and maybe even North Carolina.